today is Train Like a Woman, Ask Me Anything webinar with Dr. Stacy Sims, the author of Roar. Super stoked to have her here with us. If you're not familiar, Stacy Sims is a forward-thinking international exercise physiologist and nutrition scientist who aims to revolutionize exercise nutrition and performance for women. She has directed research programs at universities across the globe, focusing on female athlete health and performance and pushing the dogma to improve research on all women, because women are not small men. Her book, Roar, was published in 2016 and continues to captivate audiences and guide female athletes today, including myself. My name is Stevie Smith. I am a registered dietitian, board certified in sports nutrition, and I am part of the InsideTracker team, help with marketing, content, and lovely events like this webinar tonight. So we are so thankful to have you with us, Stacy. We received hundreds of questions related to women's health. It was very challenging to go through these and decide which ones to ask you today. But we kind of had a few themes in the questions. So the first one up, which I'm sure you get all the time, is we're going to kind of dive into fasting here. So, always a big one, especially, knowing that InsideTracker, blood biomarker analysis, one of our big goals is to help people live healthier longer, about longevity, adding that quality of life and the years, not just living longer, but living your best years. And a lot of that is, we feel very strongly in the science between staying active, leading a healthy lifestyle, and nutrition. So staying on top of all the evidence-based research out there. We love to help, people find their, very individualized nutrition, lifestyle, and fitness routines that work for them. A lot of our customers and clients are females. And fasting, of course, is one of those hot topics all around, but especially in the longevity space. So the first question with fasting are, just in general, what are your recommendations for fasting for women, taking in consideration age and level of physical activity? So thinking about your very active females.
Yeah, so there's a lot to unpack about the fasting, right? So I am going to spend some time setting this up. So if we look at the basic research on fasting, you have things like intermittent fasting, you have time restricted eating, and there are different terminologies. Mm-hmm. When we talk about intermittent fasting, this is a block time where you're not eating. It can be a 20-hour window, it could be an 8-hour window, it could be a 12-hour window. When we're talking about time restricted eating, this is fasting with calorie restriction, which a lot of people are like, oh, trying to understand the two differences, right? Mm-hmm. And when we actually look at the research that has been done for calorie restriction and time restricted eating or fasting itself, right? We look and see that it's been initially done on rats and then transferred over to humans. And then the few that have been done in humans has been on sedentary obese men or sedentary men. There are 2 studies that have been done on postmenopausal obese sedentary women. Mm-hmm. And when you look at those groups and those populations, then yes, things like time restricted eating. So that's a time area that you are eating with calorie restriction, or intermittent fasting can benefit because it's acting like exercise. Okay. So we look at exercise. Exercise is a fasted state in itself. And the fact that it is creating a lot of signaling for autophagy, it's creating signal for mitochondria, oxidation and increasing the ROS system. It is looking at increasing our responses for anti-inflammatory responses. It's looking at increasing our ability to use and mobilize free fatty acids. Mm-hmm. So when we're looking at the differences in an active population, regardless of gender, versus the fasting population, the stressors that you get with exercise are far above and beyond for longevity and health, better than fasting. Everyone responds to exercise. Not everyone responds to fasting. So then when we unpack it a little bit more and look at basic physiology for women, mm-hmm. Women inherently are different from men from the aspect of being XX or XY. So when we are assigned female at birth because of XX. We have inherent genetic and sex differences that affect our fueling and our responses to nutrient density. First and foremost, we are born with more mitochondria, as well as more of the protein within the mitochondria to use free fatty acids, as well as having a higher upskilled antioxidant system, because we have more mitochondria, more mitochondrial proteins. The other thing from a neurophysiological standpoint for women is we have two areas in the hypothalamus that are sensitive to nutrient density. The reason for that is we have an endocrine system that requires a lot of energy because it's a menstrual cycle. It's responsible for reproduction. So you're building tissue and shedding tissue every month. So if we look at the two areas in the brain, the two areas of kisspeptin neurons, when we start to do things like fasted training, or we are inadequate in our carbohydrate intake because of the restriction around the food that we are eating or the time window that we are eating, we get a downregulation of our kisspeptin neurons. If we get that downregulation, we get a misstep in our appetite hormones, because appetite hormones are controlled by genetic expression within those neurons. We also see a downturn in our luteinizing hormone. If we don't have an luteinizing hormone pulse, then we don't get an estrogen surge. We don't have an estrogen surge. We don't have ovulation. We don't have ovulation. We don't have progesterone. So it leads into menstrual cycle dysfunction. So I know that there are a lot of women like, hey, wait, I've been doing fasting and intermittent fasting for a super long period of time, and it works great for me. So then there are two other things to unpack here. One, what were you doing before you fell into the fasting and intermittent fasting diet? What kind of foods were you eating? When were you eating it? How were you timing it? Most of the time when people look back, they're like, I wasn't eating that well, or I was bookending my calories on either end of the day. So I was eating a lot before bed. So I wasn't getting really good sleep. I was craving things all the time. And that comes from sleep disruption. If we look at doing a normal human thing of eating with a circadian rhythm in the day, so we wake up and we have food, we're fueling for all the stress in our day, including exercise. And then we stop eating about 7 or 8 o'clock, and then we have a good night's sleep, and then we don't eat till breakfast. That in effect is fasting, but it's also normal eating. And it works so much better for women. One, when we talk about exercise, women do so much better in a fed state because we have that differences in the hypothalamus about nutrient sensitivity, as well as the fact that we fuel our bodies differently when we're exercising rather than men. So men will go through muscle and liver glycogen, and then they'll tap into free fatty acids. Women go through blood glucose, a little bit of liver glycogen, very, very small amount of muscle glycogen, and a lot of free fatty acids. So when we're looking at what's happening, the idea of getting better glucose control, autophagy, better focus and cognition, parasympathetic responses, all of those are in male data. When we look in female data, none of that happens. So that's my, like big unpacking and my rant about fasting.
I think it was great. I loved it.
Let's have some more questions.
I loved it. You brought up so many good points along the way, just looking, they took studies from rats and then sedentary obese men. And those are the things where I feel like the voices like yours and even dietitians like myself and InsideTracker trying to cut through that noise, knowing that a lot of people out there aren't trained to understand the differences in like research methods, sample populations. What they're looking at is that, obviously we love you at InsideTracker. You have a lot of fans, but I think, even just that point in and of itself, but also the point of, waking up, eating with your circadian rhythm. It seems too simple that people, I feel like, want that really complicated approach. And they're like, fasting is kind of buzzwordy versus like, if you wake up and eat food so your energy is good throughout the day. I know it's a little bit more complicated than that. You're probably going to feel better.
And your workmates are going to be happy because then you're not hangry in work meetings.
And you're not slumping at 3 p.m. and like relying on coffee, caffeine, etc., playing into that whole kind of cyclical thing. So excellent. Thank you. Not that I'm surprised. And you kind of covered all of the other questions regarding to fasting, because a lot of people are like, oh, but a clearer mind and fat loss. But as you said, what were you doing before? Usually it's a big, major, drastic change. So excellent. So moving on to menstruation, thinking about our menstruating females. So we do have a lot of endurance athletes who love Roar. I work with mostly endurance athletes, big fan. So you've recommended that female endurance athletes track their cycles and note how each individual body reacts during their cycle and training. Would you recommend that if an athlete knows during a certain phase of her cycle they do not perform well, that they schedule or reschedule their training around those periods of times? So
there's a conversation that's not being had in, I guess, the general media. It's the difference between training and performance. So if we're looking at performance on the day, that one point in time, there is no menstrual cycle effect. There's no hormonal effect because the other factors around performance on the day can influence what we do. So we know that we can go and nail a PR any point in our menstrual cycle. The idea behind tracking your menstrual cycle and periodizing your training is to leverage your hormone perturbations, because when the hormones are low, our body is very, very resilient to stress. So we can hit high loads, we can hit high intensities, we can recover well, we have more motivation. At some points, we have lower core temperature so that we have a better heat tolerance. Then after ovulation, when those hormones start to rise, our immune system changes. So we have more of a pro-inflammatory response. We have a change in our autonomic nervous system. So our heart rate variability is decreased, right? Decreased? Increased. No, decreased. I'm like, heart rate, resting heart rate goes down.
It's the backward from resting heart rate.
Yeah, I was like, wait, no. So yes, heart rate variability is down, resting heart rate and respiratory rate are up. So all these are indications that you are not recovering well, because it's not necessarily a recovery standpoint. It's just your body's not as resilient to stress. So if we're tracking our own cycle and we see the days where we can nail it and we maximize our training on those days and recover from it, we're getting more of an ergogenic boost from our hormones, because the idea of training is putting our bodies under a lot of load and overcoming that load. So if you have days where you can really pile on the load or the intensity and your body can adapt and absorb it, then that's what you should do. But remember, performance is different because you're leading your way into performance. And if you do all the things right leading up to performance, menstrual cycle is a non-issue.
That's great. A really, really great point. And I love the point about loading, right? When you can put on that big load, and also the point you made about overcoming, like recovering, adapting. I think a lot of times, at least the females I come across, they're just thinking, oh, well, I have to do more, burn more calories, lift, exercise more. And there's too much, so much of that out in the media, not about, okay, but you're not going to really work on changing your body composition or getting stronger if you're not also doing the things that your body needs to adapt and recover.
Like eating and recovering.
Yes, eating all of the things, right?
Yes.
I work with a trainer and I'm like, I'm probably the only one who puts on muscle because I eat enough. Anyways, I digress. Right. We have questions about this as well, but more for your menopausal females, segueing into what would your advice for gaining and maintaining muscle mass in menopause and beyond? So that very specific time period. Get a lot of questions about that.
Yeah. So menopause is that one day on the calendar that marks 12 months of no menstrual cycle. And it's the 5 to 6 years before that point where we start to see all these body composition changes. So with the eye to menopause and beyond about putting lean mass, it actually starts before that one point in time. Because when we start having perturbations in our estrogen, progesterone, we start having changes in muscle integrity and the nervous system responses for muscle contraction. So we have to look at eating more protein, backing up our lifting with protein. And I know endurance athletes are like, what? No, what? And we need to drop the volume that we're doing and increase our intensity, because we're looking at changing the training stress to create a stress that the body adapts to how hormones used to allow our bodies to adapt. So what I mean by that is, like, estrogen is directly linked to myosin. There's a lot of estrogen receptor sites in myosin, which is one of the contractile proteins in our muscle contraction. So when estrogen starts to go down, there's a desensitization of that and less of a response. So myosin isn't as strong and robust. If we do heavy lifting, then the nerve comes down, it tries to recruit a whole bunch of fibers to overcome that load. So myosin gets the signal, hey, you can't be lazy. You actually have to work and we have to regenerate. Mm-hmm. So it's looking at what are those kind of stressors. If you've missed the mark and now you're menopause, postmenopause, it's not too late to do that. Okay. Because we still are looking for those external stressors to supply that response that our body wants, especially in light of the fact that we are desensitized to estrogen. Yep. So it's lifting heavy, it's dropping volume, it's maintaining intensity. And note that after you hit menopause and you don't have the perturbations of our hormones, you're really, 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 really good at going long and slow. So we need to do things that will boost you so you don't fall into the long and slow, getting slower stance.
Yep. You kind of answered the next question, but the next question was that postmenopausal plateau in weight loss and muscle growth. And so would you say, I'm gathering from your answer, your suggestions to overcome that would be avoiding kind of that long and slow?
So we get into that whole, endurance athletes in particular get into that moderate intensity, the let's go for 2 to 4 hours, everyone's favorite, right?
Guilty.
And it's just not good because cortisol comes up. Mm-hmm. Baseline cortisol is up. There's a signal to break down lean mass because the body's like, I need some protein. And here's this very active tissue that's taking a lot of energy. So you break it down and you're not getting that strong stress to actually get protein muscle synthesis and increasing that central nervous system response. Mm-hmm. So this is where, when I'm working with a lot of endurance athletes who are hitting perimenopause and beyond, they're like, you want me to do HIIT work and not endurance? I'm like, I know endurance. I come from that background, like Ironman, rowing, bike racing, all that kind of stuff. But your body needs to become resilient and strong before you can actually put in the work. So let's get you strong. Mm-hmm. Let's work that high intensity so we maintain power and speed. Mm-hmm. And then the complement to that is some endurance. It's not the bread and butter.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I've learned that lesson myself as a retired Ironman, though obviously not menopausal, but yeah, it's a hard one. And that was really also another question we had about endurance training and longevity. Someone asked, is endurance training as a way of life rather than kind of one-off events likely to positively impact or negatively impact kind of, quality of life, health span? So any tips for people doing endurance training to avoid their sport impacting them later in life?
Yes. Resistance training.
Yes.
And I say that just because of some of the research coming out with regards to resistance training on muscle mass, bone mass, brain health, gut health, all of the things that we need to maintain as we get older. Mm-hmm. And if you're looking from a power-based stance of resistance training, so that's the heavy loads, the 3 to 5 reps, 3 to 5 sets, it also improves balance and coordination. So when you're 80 and you accidentally step off the curb, you don't run the risk of falling over and breaking something because you have better reaction with the power training. So the base, again, as you get older, you really need to focus on that resistance training, and the endurance is the soul food, but that's not the bread and butter of it all.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's great. I love it. So kind of switching gears a little bit, very common thing with females and endurance athletes, underfueling. Can you address the physiological reason as to why weight gain occurs sometimes in those with red S, underfueling, etc.?
Yeah, so it kind of leads back to the initial point where I was talking about fasting, where in the hypothalamus, right, we have the 2 areas of kisspeptin neurons. Mm-hmm. So when we are underfueling, we're downregulating those kisspeptin neurons. So we don't have enough energy coming in to signal to the body that, yes, we can adapt to the stress as well as take care of our own health. We know that after only 4 days of low energy availability, we start to get this downturn in thyroid and everything starts conserving. Mm-hmm. So if you are constantly under eating and in this low energy state, your appetite hormones are perturbed, your luteinizing hormone is suppressed, and your thyroid, resting metabolic rate, everything gets suppressed. So you get into this big conservation aspect. And you also start to lose lean mass because your body, again, is looking for food and fuel. So it's really, really, really difficult to put on mass. Back to your point earlier, where you're the only one putting mass on because you're eating, right? You can't put mass on unless you eat enough. Exactly. So when we're looking at putting body weight on for underfueling, it's because your body's conserving. And when you tell people to eat more, I'm sure that you know in your practice, you need to eat an extra 1,000 calories a day. People freak out because we're so in this, I'm putting weight on, I need to restrict and train more. And then you do that, you put more weight on, more body fat, and you're like, what's going on? I'm not training hard enough. We need to get out of that mantra where we need to look at fueling for what we're doing, fueling and recovering from what we're doing, adding that polarized training and making sure that we're fueling enough to keep those kisspeptin neurons going and having a proper menstrual cycle.
Yeah. And I don't know if you can speak to this, but I see a lot of women who have underfueled for so long and then just trying to get them on that journey to start digging themselves out of that hole. I don't know if you have any advice to women who might be struggling with that and who've been pretty underfueled for a long time. But it's a very common struggle, I see.
It is. And the way we start really is trying to fuel for what we're doing. So if you're eating something before and you're definitely eating something after, and then you're having your meals, you can put in another 200 to 500 calories without having impact, but actually bettering your adaptations and bettering your body composition. Mm-hmm. When people first start doing that, they jump on the scale and they're like, oh my gosh, I'm putting on weight, but it's not fat weight, which is a thing when you're using scale, which is not adequate to tell you what's going on. You're actually starting to store more carbohydrate, and with carbohydrate, you have more water storage, and it balances out after about 2 to 3 months. Everything starts to balance out, and you'll notice that your body shape is changing. You're getting more lean mass, you're getting stronger, and your sleep is better. So when you have that quantification of all of these things coming together, because you are actually fueling and being responsible for the health of all your body systems, then it starts to play forward and a little bit more food comes in and then a little bit more. But we always have to start with that increment, because if, I worked with professional cyclists, I'm like, you're under eating by 1,500 calories a day on a rest day. And they are like, wait, I'm only eating 1,500 calories a day. It's like, I know. We need to eke it up.
It hurts.
It does. I know.
Oh, that's super excellent. And I'm sure a lot of people, it's a tough thing to hear, but hopefully it starts to resonate with some women who might be watching this. I think that's great. So, flipping to more a little bit about Roar. I know you've talked about some new research coming out. It's full of wonderful, helpful tips for women. But, since writing this book in 2016, what new evidence have you collected that you feel is the most important to share with women regarding how they train? Like any big updates or like major bullet points since 2016?
Yes, so much that we're updating the book currently. So excited. We got the okay.
Spoiler alert.
It's a spoiler alert. But no, when we look at a lot of the things that are in there, like I want to talk about the IUD and how you're training with an IUD, right? So if we look at an IUD, you still, for the most part, after 6 months of insertion with a progestin-only IUD, you're ovulating. So you can track your cycle and train according to your cycle. Mm-hmm. There's more robust information talking about the differences of training with your cycle if you are naturally cycling or if it's an OCP generated cycle, just small nuances around there. Talking about the formulation of the OC. Is it a 3rd generation or 4th generation progestin? Because that can affect power training. Mm-hmm. So there's some really interesting things that come in around menstrual cycle and OC and IUD. And then, of course, gut health. There's been so much more that's come in about gut health. And I really want to preface what happens when you're doing resistance training versus endurance training with brain health, as well as taking care of the gut and the type of bacteria for BDNF and metabolites responsible for estrogen, progesterone metabolism. Things like if you have a history of short cycles versus long cycles, what's happening, how that impacts body composition, and with your eye to menopause, severity or lack of severity of symptoms. And then a whole area on early menopause, surgical menopause. And then, of course, some new biohacking stuff about heat training, cold training. There's a lot. Oh,
wow. Okay. So since we got the spoiler alert, and I'm really excited because some of this stuff, IUD, progesterone only, I'm very curious about that. So do you have a projected date, or is it still too soon to kind of...
Next year.
All right. Well, we're very excited. And, one of my wrap up questions was kind of, what's next for you? I mean, we have a great comment about somebody who's attending, how much your next level book changed her life. And just thanking you and for bringing awareness. But what's next for you besides that big spoiler alert? Is there anything else cooking up?
So we have the launch of the new menopause course, of course. We're working on more micro learnings and doing some youth stuff. So get a lot of questions about youth and coaching. And then from an academic standpoint, we have some really cool, important papers coming out. Finally got the position stand for female athlete nutrition under peer review, should be out soon. And then concussion stuff and rehab stuff. So yeah, it's all a go.
Wow. Lots of great stuff coming in. And now I know most people probably know where to find you on the internet, but where is the best way to stay kind of in touch for those updates?
So if you go to our website and sign up for our newsletter, our free newsletter, then you get a little bit of information every couple of weeks. We do a deep dive on a topic and they give you updates of different podcasts and things that have been going on, as well as letting you know like what kind of courses are coming out or what kind of events are coming up. So that's the best way to like get a hit every few weeks to keep in touch. Otherwise, just keep track on Instagram and Facebook.
Awesome. Yeah, that's great. And we have a couple more minutes, so I'm going to throw one more question from my list for you. All
right.
Do you have any tips on what to focus on when working with female clients who are over 40, beginners to working out? I know this came from someone who's kind of in a personal training coaching position, just, newer to working out later in life. Any tips for coaches, trainers in that regard?
Yeah, don't forget the fun factor because everything's going to be more difficult. But we always look at phasing in. So working mobility, how you move, running economy, cycling economy. But the biggest thing is if you're working on that whole movement stuff, right? Then people start to see almost immediate results. Because if you're working on mobility, then they'll start to see that within a week. If you're working on just basic strength and the way they're balancing and moving, then that transfers also to running. So we start with the basics phasing in, and then we start adding load with regards to cardiovascular or resistance training. And it feeds forward and it keeps being fun because you start seeing and keep seeing these incremental benefits.
That's awesome. I love that, especially the fun part, right? I think a lot of people kind of lose that, whether they're an athlete training so hard for a race or someone who's very focused on changing body composition that, a lot of us don't get paid to work out. It's a hobby. We should be doing it for the right reasons: longevity, health, feeling good. And, the mobility aspect, I think, is something that's often overlooked. So that's awesome.
And I think everyone should ditch their wearables.
Oh, did you see me with both of mine?
Yeah, I know. But every week or so, have a couple of days where you don't have wearables and you just go by feel, because people get so pulled into how many steps they've taken, how many calories they burned, how intense it was, how far they recovered. And they forget what it feels like from their own intrinsic self of having fun while you're exercising.
Yeah, I think that's great. And sorry, my dog is also agreeing with you with all of this great input barking back there. But yeah, the wearable technology, it can be a great tool. But I think that's awesome with leaning in on the fun. So, we're just about to wrap up here. Is there any other kind of words of wisdom or anything else you'd like to kind of share with our audience, or?
No, not really.
I know we covered it all.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah.
Oh, your dog wants to play with my dog.
Yeah, he does. He's a very active boy, a good buddy, lots of long walks.
Perfect.
So I'm going to wrap it up here. And again, thank you so much for your time, your knowledge, your expertise. Really appreciate you answering all of these awesome questions, and super looking forward, especially to those updates to Roar. All of those topics are super exciting and very important for all of us to just stay up to date and learn. And like I said, about longevity and being able to move and be healthy, happy for longer. So
I know. Great. Thanks.
Awesome.